Let me ask you. So you're an administrator, and also you are a teacher, right? And you're a scholar. You know, you've done your PhD, and you've written and so forth. Right? So do you have a stand when it comes to? I mean, do you belong to a school of thought within linguistics? Like there are people who are Chomskyan and people who are like oh, Chomsky is it's crap. You know, they're more of a pragmatic. I mean, where do you stand if you stand anywhere within that sort of broad debate at large?
Well, I am a social interactionist. I
Okay.
view, uh, you know, I language is a construct in itself. There's really no such thing as bounded languages. We have built up our own repertoire through every single interaction we've ever had in our
Mm-hmm.
lifetime, and we've built our own set of structures and associations and interactional histories that we may share aspects of with other people around us because we learn from the people we interact with. But you know, we're always still learning because there are always other social interactions and other genres to be exposed to. And so I think, you know, this applies to my stance on career management
Mm-hmm.
and how I train people in career transition is that, you know, this is another aspect of language learning. You're learning
Mm-hmm.
different genres so that you can speak across differences. You can communicate across differences in the workplace. You have to learn these new genres that we learn so much later in life, like resume writing, like
Mm-hmm.
narrative storytelling about
Interesting.
accomplishments, like the interview, which is a very, very culturally situated genre of interaction that you need someone to help you understand that structure. If you're a linguist, you can kind of
Hmm.
look at the structure of interviews across different situations and put together how they're structured, because we kind of reverse engineer genre structure. But
Well, that's interesting.
yeah,
So, I mean, somebody could, maybe somebody has already written like a thesis about analyzing interviews and
oh,
creating, yeah, you?
yeah, well, yeah, I I actually focus on these kinds of interviews in my research. I started researching immigration interviews between immigration officers and visa applicants, so green card applicants in the US system. And I recorded
Hmm?
immigration officers interviewing applicants for green cards, which is the permanent residency visa.
Mm-hmm.
And I could see how the immigration officers would make judgments of the applicant's verbal and nonverbal communication.
Hmm.
And there were certain types of judgments that they would make based on their, you know, cultural background, their institutional training and background knowledge that might work against applicants who come from different backgrounds and
They
have
would
different
basically they would misread them because they don't have the knowledge that, hey, this means that. Is that right?
right, you know, like eye
Yeah.
contact
Eye
that varies
contact.
so widely across
Yeah.
different communities. So in some places it's impolite and rude to have direct eye contact, especially with someone who has decision-making power, like an interviewer, especially an immigration officer. And
Hmm.
so people may avoid eye contact as a sign of respect. But in
But the interviewer would think what, that they
line,
are cagey. Oh, they're lying. Yeah,
line.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right, right, right. Okay. And so how does, let's just take that, that's a fascinating example. Let's take that example. So you do that, and how does that translate into educating these folks who are interviewing to be a little bit more aware? Okay, this person comes from Cameroon, and this is their cultural background. These are their, so therefore when they if they laugh, it means that they are respectful. Well, I don't know. I'm just making things up as I go. So how does that translate? Like, do they get? Do you go and provide that to the trainers of these guys? Or
Right. Ideally, this is what I do in other domains. In my corporate training work, I
mm,
take these insights that come
mm,
from rigorous linguistic research based on actual interviews, and I create training modules that I deliver. So typically I do this in the corporate space where it's a lot easier to provide these kinds of modules and to
mm,
be
mm,
and
mm,
to work as an independent contractor or an
mm,
in-house
mm, mm,
communications or HR person. With the federal government, there
mm,
are a lot more.
mm.
It's hard to shift that
Sure.
uh,
Yeah.
ship because you have to go through a lot more hoops to affect
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
training of
Yeah.
immigration officers.
Right. Right. Right.
Ideally, you would want to um, provide some background on differences in communicative styles so that officers could rely more on the the data that they do have in paperwork and less on judgments of
Yeah.
body language.
Yeah. 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 I mean, here's a real example of why diversity is important, because when you bring in somebody who is an administrator who comes in, right, they can sort of create that sense of, there are different ways, people have different ways of living and expressing themselves. And so therefore, just rely on the sort of, let's call them the facts, as opposed to trying to draw conclusions from cues that are misleading. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
we do typically tend to overgeneralize our
yeah.
own
Yeah.
styles of
Yeah.
communication
Yeah.
and think that what we do is the normal way, the natural way,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
right way, and we overgeneralize that. So if somebody doesn't match our own
Yeah.
communication style in some way, we think,
Yeah.
they're
It's human nature. It's human nature. It's not just this culture. All cultures sort of, they think sort of central, they think that they're the norm, and it just takes, that's why it's important to like encounter other people, because then you become aware of that. Hey, you know what I thought was universal is not actually.
exactly. Yeah. So that's the crux of my intercultural communication class that I teach in academic settings. And the main driver of the modules that I deliver in corporate settings is developing a strategy, kind of a protocol for how do you communicate across difference? How do you avoid those quick snap judgments that so many people make? And how do you kind of resist and practice not leaping to conclusions? So
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
go through a whole training
I
process.
remember I remember discovering that a few years ago that in, let's call it Indian culture. And India is such a huge continent, right? But they don't, smiling. Like if you look at, they don't smile. Why? I thought, why are they angry all the time? Apparently, if you smile, you look foolish within
Yeah,
that culture, as opposed to looking strong.
yeah,
Like there's like, you got to show your teeth in American culture. That's right. And so I'm sure you've dealt with that. But it's interesting that
absolutely.
I like, oh my gosh, when I see, whenever I was like, why are they angry? And then one of my friends said, because they don't want to look foolish,
Right.
and
Yeah,
it's disrespectful to
absolutely.
smile. Yeah.
Right. Or childish.
But child is like, what are you smiling about? You need to be serious. Life is serious.
Exactly. So that's just an example. There's never ever a one-to-one relationship
Mm,
between some
mhm.
kind of nonverbal communication and its
Yeah.
meaning. So
Mm,
smiling is a great example. I mean, I used to live in Japan. I studied, I taught, worked in Japan, and you know, smiling is so multifunctional and has many meanings in Japan. And one of the meanings is embarrassment. So if
mm,
somebody is very embarrassed, they may choose to smile, even if it's something seemingly very serious.
mm, mm,
So it's a way of showing embarrassment,
mm,
in addition to other meanings. So it's very contextually bound,
mhm, mhm.
but that can be misinterpreted by people who think, if something serious just happened, why are you smiling about it?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
We
Wow.
absolutely have to
Yeah.
learn how to bridge these differences and not leap to conclusions.
Yeah. I mean, especially in cosmopolitan places like the United States, cities where you have all kinds of nationalities. I mean, you really need to get educated and just to get exposed and, and interact with folks so that you know that, hey, when somebody's smiling, it may mean something or another. Or if they're not smiling, doesn't mean that they're angry, right? Which is for the longest time, it's like, why are Indians so angry? And I don't know, very
Right.
simplistic.
Oh yeah, and there's also a gendered component to that too.
Mm, mm,
You
mm, mhm,
probably noticed that I've been smiling a lot during this, and
mhm,
many uh, people who present as women are socialized to smile a lot, and if a woman doesn't smile, it can have a very different meaning than if a man
mm,
doesn't smile.
mhm,
So the
mhm.
very same type of behavior is evaluated very differently depending on the body that you're in and how you present to other people.
Yeah, and also I think status, right?
Yeah.
If you're like you were saying at the beginning, right? All of that needs to be factored in. Um, so, do you think, as we are, as civilization and technology and society, all of that is a moving target, so to speak. We're always evolving. It's in flux. You know, it. Do you think that as we talk to these bots, these voice bots, more and more, and become part of our lives, and 5 years from now, it's going to be more than now, and 5 years ago, it was less than now. So it's becoming more and more common that people are talking to these machines. Do you think that the human to computer, um, how people talk to computers is going to be sort of a discipline, or maybe there's already people doing that, researching how people talk to these machines, and then drawing conclusions from it and so forth. What do you think? As
Yes,
a, as a linguist, do you think that's emerging as a thing?
absolutely. Yes, there is a lot of research going on in many areas of linguistics and other fields on how people interact with bots, with computers, and and what does it mean? There's such interesting work that's being done by social scientists who evaluate how people talk with voice assistants, especially voice assistants that sound like they're female. And yeah, I think that was a driver behind the male sounding version of Siri that came out,
Mm-hmm.
and the newer voices of Siri that sound African American, and the newer voice assistants that are meant to be uh, gender, not gender free, but
Neutral, maybe in a gender.
ambiguous or
Yep,
non-binary. So
on binary. Yep, yep, yep.
people,
I've heard them. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I mean, so these are really fascinating because you know people treat these voice assistants in ways that may mirror how they might treat other
Mm-hmm.
people that they interact with. So there are studies that show that female sounding voice assistants are sometimes treated with abusive language. And originally, Siri was, or some of the female sounding voice assistants were also trained to respond to abuse with playful or humorous
Mm-hmm.
commentary, like, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so we absolutely need people who are trained in people,
Mm-hmm.
in how people communicate, to help us understand these types of interactions and to think about the type of interactions that we want to promote or the ones we may want to avoid, and think about what does it mean if somebody is abusive to a voice assistant. Does that reflect something that is happening in the world? Does it carry over to the world with people? Is it an outlet for that person that won't carry over to the real world?
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean? How do we relate interactions with bots to interactions with people?
Yeah, yeah,
We have to keep that kind of study going, and for that we really need humanists and social scientists to
yeah,
create these kinds of studies and to
yeah,
evaluate them, and to provide, go beyond the analysis to provide recommendations.
yeah. No, I think because right now, there's a lot of design being done without any of that research being, taken
Yeah.
into consideration, right? People are like, okay, so for example, I just actually just published a little article in in one of these web that has to do with how should a bot respond to abuse.
Yeah.
All right, and my conclusion is we don't know enough to know what to do, and so it should the designer should not even include anything about it. It should just say, what did you say? And what did you say? Like, okay, go ahead. I don't, it's like, I don't care what you're saying, right? So
Mhm.
it would, the machine aspect of it will come out. And so it will make that person feel like absurd, like they are abusing a wall, right?
Mhm.
Anyway, the point of it, I don't know what is the right answers to that, right? For example, the proposition that because some of them say it should chide them, it should say, no, that is bad, and so forth, right? And I'm like, okay, if somebody is twisted enough to abuse the thing by insulting it, and let's say it's not just frustration, they like to do that, right? And they hear her, let's say her, be annoyed, right? And maybe that gives them a thrill. And so they may reinforce. My point is, I don't know. And I think that's where social scientists and folks who are researching and doing things methodically will inform us and tell us, this is what happens, and perhaps you should do this versus that, as opposed to just guess or go with the. What do you think?
Absolutely. These are productive areas of research, and we definitely have to have more people from many backgrounds researching it and many backgrounds working on teams for these products. It's really important to understand this and to be able to make informed principled choices, because any type of response
Yeah.
that's coded into a voice assistant is a choice.
Mm-hmm.
So we
Mm-hmm.
have to consider the results
Mm-hmm.
of those choices.
Yeah.
And
Exactly. Yeah.
also need to make sure that these voice assistants are able to interact with a wide variety of voices, which
Mm-hmm.
means varieties of English, which means different pronunciations, which means including a lot of people who right now are not understood by voice assistants.
Mm-hmm.
This is at like the very beginning of this type
It
of
is.
work to make these voice assistants more inclusive and representative
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
more useful to a
Yeah.
wider audience.
Yeah, and that's why I'm a big believer in competition, right? So how does one differentiate against, let's say, Amazon? Maybe they have more inclusive voices. Maybe they have more, or they have recognition that is more performing. So that's sort of a different issue. But technology needs to, as opposed to, okay, they got 80%, we don't care about the other 20%, and so who cares, right? Let it not be understood by them. Well, we have the 80% of the folks who can, or even less. But anyway, so I think I think one thing that's for sure is that there's a concrete example of where research can come in and help design in a very important way. How do you respond to abuse, without reinforcing the bad behavior, for instance. And there are so many other examples where people who may think that academia is, they're doing their thing and they're writing these papers and publishing them for each other's pleasure. that's that's a misconception, I think. So let me ask you, as we close this, let me ask you sort of a big question in a way. I'm sorry we didn't get to a lot of other interesting things that you do in your life. Um, but so my question is this: academia, right? Academia, I think I agree with you, is going through an interesting phase. Let's call it, right, at this point, right? It's because knowledge distribution is changing, and people are able to learn from other places, and all that stuff, and also like somebody gets in the university, what do they want to do with that degree? So at the high level, give me a sense of what you think, like the next iteration of the university at a high level will be like. Are we going to see more certificates, or more training programs for getting them ready for using their degree to make a living, as opposed to learning and doing something in linguistics and then finding a job that has nothing to do with linguistics, right? So tell me about how you think academia as as a world will will evolve if you have if you have thought about it. I'm sure you have.
I think that there needs to be more exposure to applications of research at a far earlier
Mm,
stage,
mm,
and
mhm,
more interaction between students and faculty in academia to those who are working and producing outside of academia, and more openness to those who are researching and working outside of academia. Recognition that right now, knowledge production within universities is really not widely disseminated.
mhm,
So much research is published in academic journals that
mhm,
are very expensive. You only have access to them if you are affiliated with a university that has access to these databases and these journals. So, one good thing is that open access journals are there are more of them now. There's more access to
right.
research, but it's still not enough. And the way that articles are written is very
Yeah.
they're very difficult to read, even for people within similar fields. It can be very hard to
Yeah.
read articles across fields. So I would love to see universities recognizing that, in a sense, training people to become professors and kind of replicate the university system is the alternative. That's, it's not academia and alt academia.
Mhm.
Academia is the alternative to the wider world of research and teaching and, um, you know, knowledge production.
Yeah.
So I would really like to see more interaction and more, understanding of the ways that we can work together to,
Mhm. Yeah.
across these silos, and make better products and services, help people communicate better, and take all of these insights that come from university research out where they're
Yeah.
needed.
Yeah. Yeah. So how would you I said that one last thing. One last thing. One last thing. How would you, let's say, video is becoming big, big, very big. Like if I wanna go and learn anything, I wanna learn how to take a broken key from my thing. I go to YouTube and I figure out, hey, just get a magnet and you pull it out, and wow, as opposed to spending $200 for somebody to come and take care of it for you, right? So video is a big thing for learning. How would that, as just a quick example, how would you take that into consideration and say, okay, you wrote a paper. That paper has something that is of value for people who are not academics. How would you convert that to maybe, a 10-minute video that explains the bottom line point? Here's a problem. Here's what we saw. Here's a solution. Here are the key insights, or something like that. There's so much opportunity, it feels to me, that to take all that great research, which is embodied in the paper, that very few people have the patience and the capacity and even the access to read it, and then sort of unpack it and make it more accessible so that folks can consume it.
Video is one option.
Yeah,
It's one modality, and there are drawbacks to videos. There are
of
times,
course.
when videos aren't captioned
Mm,
or captioned
hmm.
properly with,
Yeah,
hand correction. That's a lot of resources that's needed to make sure that captioning is proper and correct, so that people who, um, don't are hearing impaired, or who can't, watch a video with sound on, are able to access it. So I think people have to look at multimodal ways to get their research out. And there are a number of ways to do that through, I think Twitter is a huge source of learning through,
mm, mm,
threaded tweets and tweetorials. And the good thing about that is that it's scannable, quickly digestible, and, you can read a lot faster than you can watch a video.
true.
So video is good for some things.
Yep.
It's one mode, and, getting work out through,
Yep.
popular online publications, through Medium, through, um, social media sites, and through websites that are, constructed like a portfolio, that are
Hmm.
easily
Yeah.
entered into and digested
Yeah.
with accessible plain language for people are really
Yeah.
useful. So I think researchers in particular have to think about
Yeah.
all the different modes that they can use to access different audiences.
Yeah. And I think you're well positioned to help with that. I think there should be a movement towards that for the university to grow as opposed to shrink into an irrelevancy where only folks, who are talking to each other dwell, right? Because that would be tragic. I'll tell you what, we can talk for another hour, but I know you're a very busy person. Dr. Alex Johnston, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. It was a great conversation.
Thank you. I always enjoy talking with you, Ahmed. Really appreciate this chance.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.